Alright, so I don't know if you've heard or not, but according to some rumors my buddy Lonnie started, the Nintendo Switch's successor may not have backwards compatibility. And even though I personally don't think this will actually end up happening, I think the people who do aren't really making a big enough deal about it, and if you can withstand the full brunt of my award-winning intro, I'll tell you all about it. Okay, so the main reason why the Switch's successor would allegedly neglect backwards compatibility boils down to a new processor that make running the old software built for the old Tegra X1 chip difficult. Look, I have no doubts that the issue is probably real, and trust me, I know Nintendo has a history of getting cocky after hitting a home run and then doing stupid things on the follow-up. After all, I literally made an entire video about every time this ever happened, so I'd love to think that Nintendo might have learned from their mistakes and not get cocky just because the Switch ripped all kinds of ass this generation. Because being cocky enough to believe that the Switch's successor doesn't need backwards compatibility would be far worse than simply not being able to play the thousands of Switch games we've all been collecting over the years just because of some new hardware. Sure, that's a great reason to be outraged, but the biggest issue at hand here is if N-Dog's cocky enough to not give everybody something they clearly want for the Switch's successor, then what else would they be willing to do to give consumers the finger? Have the hardware still be underpowered? Take away the hybrid concept in favor of some lame gimmick that nobody's actually going to use? Launch with Pilot Wings or Steel Diver again? Nintendo's too stupid to see how crucial backwards compatibility is, and there's no way they won't make far bigger mistakes on the new Switch U. Hell, they might even end up actually naming it that if this ends up being true. However, even though I'm sure there probably are some compatibility issues that need to be dealt with, I'm like 85% sure Nintendo would find a way to deal with them and make it work. Look, I don't know jack shirt about technical stuff, and I'm not about to pretend to until at least a few months anyway, but still though, I can't fathom that any technical issues a new processor would bring up couldn't just be worked out eventually. Me and Microsoft went above and beyond to make sure 360 games are compatible on the Xbone and Series X, and like, yeah, Nintendo doesn't pay attention to what other companies do, which you'd believe if you looked at the Switch's internet, so it's possible that they aren't even aware of the lengths Microsoft went to. And even if they did, it's highly unlikely that they'd go to the same lengths to make sure we could all play CoComelon on the new hardware. Then again, maybe they would though, although even the Switch Lite has a few games that you can't play like Mario Party, Just Dance, and Forgettable Cardboard Game that may or may not have a name. Let's not forget that the Switch itself isn't even backwards compatible, but like, I don't think anybody can really blame Nintendo for that one, because first of all these little ass cartridges are way cooler than that dingus ass disc that the Wii U was using, and there really was no way to make that kind of a jump in how physical media is sold without sacrificing backwards compatibility for a generation, you know? Like, if you're gonna make that kind of a sacrifice, then there was literally no better console generation to do it for than the Switch. Because, I mean, seriously, as mad as some of us may have been about all these Wii U ports, you never saw too many people complaining about buying the same games, quote, again, seeing as almost nobody bought them in the first place. The outrage was pretty much over the fact that Nintendo wasn't putting out as much new stuff as they should have been, and as for the 5 or 6 of us who did buy these games the first time, it's not like we had to buy them again on the Switch, and in most cases, everything was just fine. I used to not really get the trend of releasing new hardware and not putting any real exclusives out for a couple of years, seeing as I grew up in the era where new hardware was a night and day difference, not just visually, but also opened up a new world of gameplay possibilities on top of that. These days, though, it just makes more sense to release current games on the old hardware that way more people own, and then just kind of copy and pasting it onto the new hardware for the early adopters, mainly because the games are still ultimately the same thing. Sure, the newer hardware might load things a little faster and have a little more shadows or whatever, but ultimately, it's the exact same experience on the old hardware, too. And like, yeah, I know people will say that the Switch is really outdated, and well, of course it is, but while it would make sense for AAA Multiplats to only put newer games out for the Switch too, the majority of modern games really don't rely on graphical power all that much, so you might as well just put those out on the original Switch, at least for a little while longer after its successor comes out, and then just rely on the backwards compatibility to play the same game on both platforms. I mean, the Switch has well over 100 million units sold at the time of this recording, so does it really make sense to release 2 different versions of Peppa Pig for 2 different Nintendo platforms? I mean, they used to do it, but it doesn't really make sense anymore, you know? And if you could only play Peppa Pig on the original Switch, then why would anybody even need to bother buying a Switch 2? For Resident Evil 9? Pfft, who needs that when you can play as this cute little porker? When Nintendo became cockier than ever after the success of the Wii, though, they made just about every mistake in the book when it came to the Wii U, but for all the stupid blunders they made on that console, one line they never crossed was sacrificing backwards compatibility with Wii games, because Nintendo knew it was crucial. I suppose you could argue that since the Switch was more successful than the Wii, that Nintendo might be a little more high off their own farts than ever before, but let's not forget that the Wii and DS combined were far more successful than the Switch is right now, so I'd say that the below oversized end was probably a little cockier during that time period. Like, sure, there's still a pretty good chance that they're cocky to some extent, but I just don't see any scenario where they wouldn't see backwards compatibility as anything but crucial. Then again, this is Nintendo we're talking about here, known to do not only stupid things out of pure arrogance, but also just pure, well, weirdness, so it is certainly possible that they neglect backwards compatibility on the next console, though, I guess. I just think people are getting outraged over the unconfirmed rumors are overreacting, since there's little proof that Nintendo won't find a way to make it work, and that they're not even overreacting enough if they really do believe it to be true. Anyway, that's all for today, but if you got a kick out of my wacky rambling and disturbing imagery though, then you should check out that video I mentioned earlier about the history of cocky video game consoles, where Nintendo takes up most of my time, but if you'll excuse me though, I gotta go commit perjury. Later.